Well, welcome everybody. I'm Bev Morrison. If I haven't met you and haven't seen you tonight, welcome to the February Town Hall meeting of VICA, where our focus will be on demographics as we continue our consideration of this year's theme of Who is My Neighbor? I'm a member of the current board of directors of the Venice Interfaith Community Association. Before we get started on this evening's topic, I'd like to bring your attention to a couple of issues of concern to VICA. The first is financial. The pandemic has caused so many changes and challenges in our lives. For VICA, a major change has been in the way we serve or support the community. Meetings via Zoom help us to meet mentally to consider topics, and for this we are grateful. However, you will remember when we met in person, a basket for donations was always available and you were generous with your contributions. This helped to keep our resources stocked so we could plan future meetings and better help when needs arose in the community. Meetings via Zoom don't permit that donation basket to be in sight, and our resources are running low. Any donations you might make to support VICA would be most appreciated. You can mail a check to VICA, P.O. Box 2022 Venice 34285, or you can visit the Venice website to make a contribution through PayPal. Any donation you make will be most appreciated and will be used in the Venice community. Secondly, VICA's mission is to foster respect, understanding, and communicate and cooperation in the community. We're an association of volunteers and we're always looking for new energy, new faces, and new ideas. Have you thought about becoming more active with VICA? We would love to hear from you. Send an email about your interest and let's talk. And now let's get started with the program. I'd like to begin with a short meditation by M.M. Killeran. Here in this space, we are gathered, called by our sense of urgency or duty or the longing for community, called to be together on this day. Here in this space, we are gathered, called to hold ourselves accountable to our values, to remind ourselves of those hopes and dreams and possibilities for which sometimes in the rough and tumble world, it can be hard to hold on to belief. Here in this space, we are gathered, called to do our part in weaving a web of human community. Here in this space, some of us have come in pain. The pandemic assures it has been a difficult world. To those who are dealing with issues of health, we pray, we wish for courage and healing. May we pause and hold gently all the concerns, named and unnamed, that are gathered in this room this day. And in the complexities of community, it is right that in this space, some have come with joy bubbling in their heart. May we rejoice together, remembering the wisdom that says joys are multiplied when shared. May we remember our gratitude for warmth, thankfulness for sunshine, appreciation for the simple taste of whatever food our lives and bodies let us choose. May our shared silence be a blessing on our hearts, on this community, and may this blessing extend outward to grace the wider world. Amen. 2 years ago, VICA sponsored a very successful lecture series entitled American Racism, Yours, Mine, and Ours. Owing to a sizable grant, we were able to invite the participation of a number of well-known speakers from throughout the country to help us develop an understanding of systemic racism. The next year, another series of speakers broadened our knowledge of institutional racism in education, the criminal justice system, and the environment, with a concluding session on personal responsibility for community transformation. Enter the pandemic. Funding down, our format no longer advisable. How could we move forward? An investigation of what has been happening in other parts of the country led to the discovery of Putting Racism on the Table, a project begun by the Washington area grant writers to investigate how philanthropy might mitigate the impact of racism. They addressed a number of the issues that VICA had: structural racism, white privilege, implicit bias, mass incarceration, but also demographics. We did not cover demographics, hence the idea of having you view the lecture that we've all watched in the last couple of weeks. The Racial Mosaic of America, a lecture by Dr. Emmanuel Pastor, is one of their productions. The topic fit perfectly with the theme VICA was planning around this year, Who is My Neighbor? but the demographics were specific for the Washington, D.C. area, not Florida. Our guest this evening was asked to help us make the transition from the information shared by Dr. Pastor about the Washington area to Florida, our area of immediate concern. Please meet Dr. Joel Morrison, a retired cartographer and geographer who has some interesting information to share. Joel, please begin by sharing some information about you, your background, and how and why you are familiar with the census. Take it away, Joel.
Okay, thank you. Most of you probably know that I served as the geography director of the Bureau of the Census during the 90s. And one of the things that my group, we had about overall about 350 employees, were to do the Tiger files, which you may have heard of. But anyhow, all that information is used, to redistrict down to the city ward level, as well as up to the congressional level. And we dealt closely with U.S. Postal Service because the bounds on our work were that every 3 months we got lists from the post office of, at that time, about 120 million addresses to which they delivered mail each day. And it was up to us to make sure all those places were visited and the people who reside there were counted. And so that's where I became somewhat familiar with census and demography and things like that. Basically, I am a numbers person and not a demographer. What I want to do tonight is to make some comparative remarks about the racial and ethnic characteristics of the population of our geographical area, Venice, Sarasota, and the state of Florida, to those that you saw in the presentation by Dr. Emmanuel Pastor. I will look at some of the points that he made and then try to direct data from our area to those points. Dr. Pastor used data primarily about the Washington, D.C. metro area from the censuses for 1980, 1990, 2000, and 2010. Three of his major points over that time frame were: one, the Black percentage of the total U.S. population has remained remarkably stable at 13%. Two, the Hispanic percentage of the U.S. population has been rising rapidly. And three, the percentage of Black population plus the percentage of white population in the U.S. has been declining. So if you add those two percentages together, it's been declining, and you know why in a minute. First, I'll briefly expand the database for my presentation by going back to the 1850 census, which was the first census in which the state of Florida was recorded. Florida entered the Union in 1845. I will broaden the breakdown of the period 1980 to 2010 to include Sarasota County and Venice. And finally, I'll add my own determination of the best estimates I've seen for the 2020 census. This will give us a longer time span in which to view the local data. As you're aware, the U.S. Census is conducted every 10 years as prescribed in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, and Amendment 13. It's one of the few government agencies, if not the only one, that is actually in the Constitution. The census began in 1790, and we are currently awaiting the final results of the 2020 census. The final results for 2020 were delayed by several legal actions last year, and the census, fortunately, was allowed to continue as it had planned, and so we will expect some results, final results, beginning in September. Florida's total in the national censuses began with those included in the census of 1850. We must remember that this part of our state was very slow to settle. This was especially true of the area south of Tampa Bay. In the early 17th century, beginning with De Soto's expedition and other Spanish expeditions, in the 1630s, the Spanish conquistadors wrote that life on land south of 27 north latitude, and that's the southern end of Tampa Bay, was uninhabitable by humans due to swamps, insects, humidity, Indians, etc. The Spaniards, of course, had encountered a distinctly different climate from that of their homes in Castile and Leon in Spain. So our discussion will begin with the reported 1850 census for the United States, Florida, and Hillsborough County. That should be on your screen now. The 50 count relates to 23,191,876 people in the United States, with the breakdown being 84.3% white, 13.8% slaves, and 434,195 free colored individuals. In 1850, Hillsborough County registered only 2,377 inhabitants. And as you can see, 1706 were white, or 71%, and 660 were slaves, with 11 free colored. Florida had 87,445 people, of which 54% were white, and 46% were black, of which those blacks were 39,310 slaves. Hillsborough County in 1845 covered the area south from Tampa Bay to Fort Myers, across the state to Lake Okeechobee, and then north to above the 28th parallel. As southward settlements slowly began to prove the early Spaniards wrong, Hillsborough County was divided in 1855 into Hillsborough, Manatee, and Brevard counties. Present-day Sarasota County became part of the new Manatee County and remained so until 1921. And I'm sure you're aware that this is the 100th anniversary of the creation of Sarasota County. By the 1900 census, Manatee County was registering 4,063 people, and the total population of the United States was counted as 76,094,000. That's quite an increase for the United States in that 50 years. And where we are, it wasn't much of an increase at all. By the 1950 census, whoops, went the wrong way, sorry. 1950 census, which really was just 70 years ago, and hate to admit it, but some of us were alive at that time, and so it isn't too long ago. The numbers read as 152, 271, 417 total population in the US, of which 89% were white and 10% were black. Now, there are others besides in races, whites and blacks, and just keep that in mind as we go through. I'll say more about that later. And you can see again what has happened with Florida: 78% white, 21%, almost 22% black, and finally Sarasota County with 16% black. Regarding Dr. Pastor's three major points, his first point raised the question: has the black percentage of population remained nearly constant at 13% in our local area of concern? If you include the free colored blacks with the slaves in 1850, the percentage was 15.7, while 13.8% were slaves. By 1900, blacks constituted 12%, and by 1950, they were counted as 10.6%. Since then, that number has risen to approximately 13% and remained constant for the last 70 years. 2020 estimates of the percentage as 13.4%. And as you remember from Dr. Pastor's statement, his 4 censuses showed numbers ranging right around 13%. So in terms of our local area, and second here, this gives you kind of a rundown of what that percentage was. You can see for the United States, it really did kind of trend toward 13%, and that's where we are today. For Florida, we got down to 13% by 1980. We see a slight rise in the 21st century here, and we'll have to keep an eye on that to see if it's going to depart from the 13% that we're accustomed to. Excuse me. The second point of Dr. Pastor was that the percentage of Hispanics has been steadily rising over the time of his study. Now, data on Hispanics only began to be counted by this census in 1973. So from a rise in 73, I can't see that, but I guess the rest of you can. The Hispanics have grown up to 2020 as being approximately 10% of the population. I'll say this now and I'll repeat it later. We're dealing with two things here. White and black are race. Hispanic is considered an ethnic group. So that if you add, you can't add Hispanic to the white and black on this particular slide. You have 95% are either white or black, but you have an additional 10% who are Hispanic. Hispanics can be both black or white. Some object to checking that box on the census, and maybe you can understand why. They do not really pay as much attention to the color of your skin as perhaps white and black people do. Another thing to note is that by 2000, really, the Hispanic numbers outnumbered the black by about 1 million or almost 500,000. And by now, you can see where there are 22 million more Hispanics than blacks in the US. Relative to Florida, Sarasota County and Venice, the number of Hispanics has also risen. In 1990 census, the percentage of Hispanics in Florida was 12.2, which has risen to 26.4 in the 20 years. For Sarasota County, the rise has been from 4.3 to 9.7%, and for Venice, it has grown from 1.1% to 2.7%. Although it is not possible to state for certain that Dr. Pastor's second point is correct for all of Southwest Florida, and we may be the anomaly here, it certainly would appear to be. Pastor's third point was that the combined percentage of the black population plus the percentage of white population is declining. Now, when using percentages, this calculation becomes a zero-sum game. So this is not surprising. The Hispanic percentage is increasing, so the remainder of the population has to decrease, and the remainder is composed of blacks and whites. So it is estimated that in 2020, 18.5% of the US population is Hispanic, leaving the remaining 81.5% as non-Hispanic. Okay, again, do not let these numbers confuse you. Hispanics are the ethnic counts, while blacks and whites are racial counts. There are both black and white Hispanics, and for clarification, the estimated 2020 racial components for the US are 76.3% white, 13.4% black, and 10.3% other racial, the largest portion of which is Asian, at almost 6%. In 2020, the percentage black plus the white population is estimated to be 89.7. So that that would account then for the Hispanics showing up at about 10%. in that area. So I don't think there's any question about Pastora's third point, that the black and white percentages are dropping relative to the Hispanic percentage. Now, the question really becomes one, in our area of the world, are we dropping faster, or are we, say, holding our own and not living up to the speed with which the Hispanic population is increasing? And that's something we're going to have to pay attention to, and particularly when we get down to the level of Venice itself. Okay, an alternative way to dig deeper into Sarasota County and Venice is to look at population pyramids. Now, I think you all probably have seen one in your lifetimes, but simply it breaks up your age of population, and well, in this case, in 5-year increments, pretty much, and tells the number of males and females that are counted in each of those things. A normal, not a normal population pyramid, but kind of the ideal is what you see on this figure. And then you compare what your local pyramid is to that pyramid to look at your own situation. Anyhow, there is another thing called the dependency ratio. And this is hard to explain, but harder for some people to understand. It is typically the people not in the economy, dependent people, 0 to 14 and 65 plus, and those typically in the labor force, the productive part of the labor force, which is 15 to 64. And it is used to measure the pressure on the productive population of the people in that arena. I looked through, they have published such figures for every country in the world. When we get to that, I'll say a little bit more. Okay, let's look for a minute. We have some estimations from the 2017. And I think I'll break here and say something about census statistics. Although we're required by the Constitution to make a total count, that is to count everybody in the United States on, we usually use April the 1st of the decennial year, so it would be 2020 was the date. We have developed in the Census Bureau a thing called the American Community Survey. I am really pleased with it, and what they have done, if you can imagine the problem of doing a complete enumeration once every 10 years, that is a big job. Certainly parts of the country are more rapidly changing than others. Certainly the importance measured by dollars and cents of parts of the country are more important than the others. And so the American Community Survey was set up so that it will sample throughout the 10 years that the decennial census is not being taken. It will be sampling different areas, primarily counties. I know if you go online and look at Sarasota County, you can get a tremendous amount of information about Sarasota County from the last time that the American Community Survey worked on Sarasota County. And it would be in line that they probably do it every 2 or 3 years. This is important because right now, if we were held to law, we would have to use the 2010 statistics. Well, we have changed, not only here, but all through the country since 2010, getting up to where we are in 2021. So those statistics are pretty badly out of date, and that's why we're eagerly awaiting the 2020 data. What I have here are data on 2017 and from the American Community Survey. Several things I'll point out. Florida, all races and ethnicities, you see a pyramid that is not like the one that I showed you as the kind of model pyramid. You have bulges in it in the above 50 range. And you have, well, let's talk about that. That is what we commonly call baby boomers, those two bulges there. Then we have this anomaly about age 25. And everyone's not sure what brings that about, but some have said that it represents the last child of the baby boomers. But I don't know if that's what it is or not. So if we look at Florida, you can see that very clearly. If we look at Florida in the lower, Florida in the lower left-hand corner, we see the white population, not the Hispanics, even emphasizes that. So you can see where the bulge in the range, in the age range above 50, 55 is representative of the baby boomer generation moving out of the top of the pyramid. Again, we have that anomaly at 25. Looking at the Hispanic thing in the upper right-hand corner, we see that it's quite different. In some respects, if you blur a little bit, you can see that the bulge in the Hispanic is at the place where the whites have dropped off. And that's pretty well true, that we have a large proportion of Hispanics that right now are under the age of 60, not over the age of 60, and probably results from our first wave here in Florida or from the Cuban Revolution in 1960. And that was just 60 years ago. They have managed what seems to be prevalent in the Hispanic community is they move here, they have primarily been used to large families, large number of children per family. And I think that shows a little bit in how far out of the younger kids are there. There's been some tracing in California that suggests as the Hispanics become more acclimated to the US, that their birth rate drops and is coming down to, well, hopefully not to the birth rate of whites, because the whites are not reproducing themselves, but come down more in line with that rather than the large number. The Black group has, again, a little expansion in the 25 and under age. But one thing to really look at here is that the Hispanic numbers are larger than the Black numbers at every age group, if you look through there. The horizontal scale on these graphs, or these pyramids, are not the same. And so you can see, first of all, you'd have to add them all together to get the top one, upper left-hand corner. But you can see that the Hispanic is running about twice what the Black is right now. And that's in line with the numbers that we see. And that's expected to get larger. I'm not used to lecturing. I'm running out of, I need to have some water here. Anyhow, these observations really are in agreement really with what Pastor said, which wasn't a surprise. And his third point, that the number of Hispanics are increasing while the number of white and Black are decreasing. Okay, there is, in this particular area, there is one other thing that I am trying to weigh as you look at these pyramids. And let's see if I can bring it up. I got off my text, so I'll have to get back to it. Apologize. The main thing here to look at, I guess, is that at this period in time, 2017, if you look at the horizontal axes, the Hispanic is about 1/3 of the total Florida population. 600,000 K, 200,000 K, 200K. Now, in 2000, in the 2000 census, 17 years earlier, the white abscissa versus the Hispanic abscissa was a factor of 5-to-1. So the Hispanics have made up from a 5-to-1 ratio to a 3-to-1 ratio in just the 17 years. We've been calculating these. Okay, let's move on to one other set of pyramids. This reveals something a little bit different. As you can see, Venice is really, it's hard to call that a pyramid. Florida, as one might expect, is more even in all ages than probably what the country is as a whole. It's because we're, we have a number of older people that most of the rest of the country does not have. Sarasota County shows, certainly you can kind of get an idea of the baby boomers in there toward the top. And another group on the bottom, which sticks out, which could well be Hispanics coming in. The one for Venice, there's no getting around the fact we're just old, I guess. That's all we can say. Some things to look at here. There is a thing called a dependency ratio, which I mentioned earlier. It talks about the ratio of people over 65 and under 20, which are dependent, child dependency and old age dependency, on that major workforce between those ages. And Venice is sadly lacking on any of those. You can see, or maybe you can't read, but for Florida, that ratio is 67. Now remember, this is just an index. It doesn't mean anything other when until it's compared with others. For Sarasota County, that index is 70.6. And for Venice, it's 212. Now, I looked up at the different countries in the world. The world itself is like 54.5. One of its closest in the US, Massachusetts, is at 57. But we do have in the world Chad and Mali, who have indices over 100, as do Somalia. And we do have, on the other end of that scale, numbers that are under 20, which include Qatar, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, I said. Okay, so that gives you a brief look at that. It shows that actually Florida as a whole is more age dependent. Sarasota is even more age dependent, and Venice is incredibly age dependent. I don't know if there's any help for us in Venice. Okay, finally, I'd like to consider what these numbers, try to bring these numbers I've talked about right down to your daily, day-to-day work. This may sound kind of funny, but I'll go with it anyhow. As a resident of Venice, what are your chances of interacting with Blacks or Hispanics? Okay, if we forget the current pandemic situation, if you were to attend the Venice Theater, which has a maximum seating of 358 people tonight, you could expect that the audience would have 2 or 3 Blacks and maybe 10 or 11 Hispanics. If you went to the Sarasota Opera House with a maximum seating of over 1,000, 1,114, you might expect to see 55 Blacks and 110 Hispanics. Now, if we turn that around and if we had the percentage of Blacks and Hispanics in Venice that was equal to that in the state of Florida, when you got to the Venice Theater, you may encounter 60 Blacks or 80 or 94 Hispanics. And at the Opera House, you could expect 188 Blacks and 293 Hispanics. It's no question, but it's more difficult for Venetians to stay in Venice and make friends, even acquaintances with people of other ethnic and racial backgrounds. Not only are there a majority of Venetians of retirement age, but they lack easy opportunities for interaction with younger individuals who might possibly be of a different race or ethnic background. So I say, what does Venice see as its future with respect to racial and ethnic integration? Does Venice want to try to retain its current identity? If Venice remains a golf course residential community, do we expect that its demographic character will remain as it is today? What programs would be necessary to make a substantial change? Considering the large number of already planned future homes in Venice, has that choice already been made for us? A choice that may make substantial change impossible. What are your ideas of the future population composition of here where we live in Venice, Sarasota County of Florida? You may remember that Dr. Pastor presented a scenario that the current age profiles in the United States indicate that the growing Hispanic profile is similar, but one generation behind our current white and Black population. What does that mean for Florida? And how do we prepare for it? And I'll stop there and take any questions you may have. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. Since you were all muted, I don't know if you're asleep or what, or what you're doing. Okay, well, Bev, take over.
Yeah, and Claire, I don't know if any questions have come in to you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
My name is Susan Stewart, and I've been listening and appreciate your analysis of these statistics. But I have a question about the question of race on the census and its purpose other than for statistical analysis, because I understand why we do a census for representation in our government and also for governmental expenditures for various income levels and age groups and so forth. But I'm not sure what else is gained by learning about race other than this kind of statistical analysis.
Well, I'll be quite honest with you. I agree with you. One of the faults that we did was asking the question to begin with. Why did we ask the question to begin with? Because when they wrote the Constitution, they needed to have a number to apportion the House of Representatives to the various states. And that was quite a battle. And you may remember that ended up that you count everybody, that slaves are counted as 3/5 of a person. And therefore, in order to find that, we had to enumerate slaves to get that total. I've often thought in this day and age, especially when I worked at the census, we would have been a lot better off had we never asked the question. They're all people.
That's right.
Why do we need to break it down? Well, we have a history dating back to 1790 that breaks them down, unfortunately. And that's about the best I can come up with, because I really can't. The only thing that I hold sacred in the thing that they did with the Constitution is that they count everyone that's walking on the ground in this country, because the statistics that the census is used for today go far beyond limits like, well, Black and white is a limitation. It goes far beyond that. We don't ask, for example, if a hurricane came in here, would we expect FEMA to ask how many Blacks and how many whites are here? Would we expect, that's just not a reasonable question. It has no purpose end of thing. We need to know how many people are here. Would we need to ask how many citizens are here? No. I mean, I'm not going to go down through a hurricane devastated area and ask each one whether they're a citizen or not and whether they qualify for bottled water or anything like that. So it's very important that we make a total count. One last comment, because you get me started, I can't stop. The total count that's done every 10 years is very difficult. You have no idea the difficulty of trying to fulfill getting everyone counted. That's why I really like the American Community Survey, which is a very complex statistical procedure that has been tried in other countries, Germany foremost, and is found actually to be more accurate than the whole count. And I can believe it because I know what goes on in the whole count. So I pay attention first and foremost to the results of American Community Survey data, or I look at what the census does. Enough of me. Thank you for the question.
Joel?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm also wondering about the whole piece of things around the dependency ratio and
Yes.
looking at the 65 plus with the changing workforce and people staying in the workforce longer. Do you think that has an impact at all? Is that substantial enough to have an impact?
It may in certain countries. Remember, I didn't probably say this. The dependency ratio is a World Bank statistic, and they apply it equally amongst all the nations of the world. So while it may be true here, which I think it is, I don't know how it would play in, Egypt right now. Okay, and being comparable statistics. But you're right, Claire. We are seeing the productive age increasing in the country. And to my knowledge, I'm not sure we have good data on that.
Yourselves. Joel, it's
Yeah.
Barb Griffin here.
Yeah.
I have a question about the 2020 census. We understand that it's been conducted mostly online. And I wonder if you have any idea of how complete they were able to do this census,
Well,
because
Barb,
the way it was conducted.
okay, I guess it bothers me less than the fact that the decision as to when you're done with the census is when every one of those, whatever it is today, let's say 150 million addresses that the post office reports to every day have been contacted.
Mhm.
Okay, now I've been out in the field and was introduced to picking up numbers by knocking on doors from people who had, or from addresses who hadn't responded. And what can I say? It was very eye-opening. I didn't believe half of the responses that we got, and some of them just wouldn't respond even though they were inside the house. They'd open the door, but they wouldn't answer. And so I don't know that we can segregate that. The total, again, as I said, we keep looking at how many of those millions of addresses have we contacted. And once we get to that point, then we're done. But I don't know if that will hold out to be, there's just so many little anecdotal evidence of these things that people don't, the common person, and pardon me, but I'm going to include you all in that group, do not understand. And we have the phenomena, one of the phenomena we had to deal with are mailboxes that were only there one day a month to receive the government check. because it was too dangerous to have mailboxes, would be stolen, stuff would be stolen from them any other time. So on the first of the month, or whenever the government checks are coming out, there are more addresses than there are on the other 29 days of the month, or whatever it is. So you have to deal with that. And it just goes on and on. But
Very complicated.
yeah, it is extremely complicated.
Right. Thank you.
So I have a question. So the use of the census is still to get the House of Representatives to have the right number of people represented, is it right?
Well, that's, yes.
Okay, so how, can you tell me, Joel, how gerrymandering these things is done through the census? And is there any possible way to end that practice so that we really get a more balanced representation?
This is something that's very close to me. The first thing, I want to correct you a little bit. The census does not do the gerrymandering. The census provides the numbers.
Right.
It's the Republicans and Democrats that do the gerrymandering. It's an absolute, what can I say, horror piece for this country. It's my firm conviction that through gerrymandering, we have created a series of House seats in various states that are so tightly, you cannot elect anything but a Republican from here. You cannot elect anything but a Democrat from here. And that's just the beginning of it. What that allows them to do, the people that are elected from there, can be just as dogmatic and different, go out on a far limb, extreme, I guess is the word I'm looking for, as they can be. If they were in a district where the swing vote was 1 or 2 percentage points, they would be much more conscious, I think, the representatives, of the needs of the people that they're serving and all like that. But if you have someone who's been elected 20 times from a district that votes 80% Republican, they don't have to pay attention. They can fight any proposal that they want, and it just isn't right.
So then how was the gerrymandering established? Because at one point it was not gerrymandered to the degree it is now. And I know it is a Republican and Democrat, it's a political party thing, but how, is there a law behind it that says that this is the way it is going to be, or?
It's by state, Donna. And the state legislatures usually hold that that's one of their prized possessions, that they've been given the right to do that. It has to be taken away from the state legislators, in my mind. We could do a wonderful job with the computers that we have today, and with the data and the statistics we have from elections and from the population census, in terms of making pretty much an even table across the country. I see very few doing it. The best thing to do would be for a state to try to pass a law that requires an independent commission to draw those lines, and not to let the legislators look at it until it had been approved. But I don't think I'm talking up the wrong tree there.
Well, yeah, especially because probably most of us feel the same way, but then how do you translate that to the larger legislative body and one that's already rigged?
I can explain what happened in Michigan. I was part of a grassroots coalition recently, just 2 years ago in Michigan. We had to get a number of signatures on a petition to put it on the ballot, put it on a vote to the people, whether to implement this nonpartisan commission. And we did get it passed. And of course, there was some opposition and there was some court cases, but it was upheld. So this will be the first time that we will have an independent commission determining how the states are, how the districts are drawn. And in Pennsylvania, they do it by computer. A computer draws their districts. So it can be done, but it takes a huge grassroots effort to
Yes.
get it on the ballot.
For example, in the state that we live in, unfortunately, right now, the Republicans can tell you who the Speaker of the House will be around 2026.
Yeah.
Because
I have a question.
we are so gerrymandered, and we know the hierarchy or the who the different members of the Republican caucus are, and they've kind of made it out. So we can pretty well tell who's going to be running it, unless we get. I guess we did have the Florida Supreme Court reject a redistricting plan over the last 10 years, but I think now I'm not sure of the makeup of the Florida Supreme Court. So it's hard to say.
Joel, I have a question.
Yeah.
Whether census is conducted by door knocking or by mail, we lose totally those citizens or those people who live in the country who are homeless. I wonder if you have any idea of the numbers and whether not including them makes a big difference in the allocation of representatives.
Yes, the Census Bureau takes these into account. They do go to homeless shelters. They do go on the street to collect data. They have to do it with incarcerated people in the things. They have to do it with hospitals, mental institutions, and all of these. They have different plans for enumerating all these different types of individuals. And it's, as I said, it's a big operation. And
those are the non-door openers.
there's some things I just wouldn't want to do, jobs I wouldn't take. I'll put it that way. But yeah, it's difficult. Yes. Bill.
Time to time, I hear bandied about the term brown as opposed to black and white. And some Hispanics may consider themselves brown as opposed to either white or black. Does brown never caught on though as a race? And is there a reason for that?
Well, it isn't a race, according to the Hispanics.
Yeah.
Hispanics, when it first came out, the Hispanics rebelled. I forget what census it was that the Hispanic was treated as a race, and they just failed to register. They failed to answer the question.
That's what the other one said.
And so I really don't know an answer. I keep seeing different words, which I'm not familiar with, but Latinx and things like that. How does that differ from, Chicano, which used to be a word that was used, and all like that, but they just don't seem. And one other thing I didn't mention, of course, I'm a map person, and I first really look for maps to show this. I can't get any map that has the detail that I could show over this for you. You would have to have it in your hands. Let me tell you, Sarasota County is highly segregated from black and white. Almost all the blacks in Sarasota County do live in the Newtown area of Sarasota City. One thing that's interesting to me in looking at the map is the Hispanics seem to be more dispersed throughout the county by far. There are little pockets of Hispanic, but they seem to be more dispersed, much more dispersed than the black population in our county. What the reason for that is, I don't know, but it's interesting. Again, I don't think the Hispanics are looking at themselves as one race or the other.
But there are also many people living in America who consider themselves brown, and they're not Hispanic. They may be Indian or Middle Eastern or
right.
So.
With what the 1619 report that the New York Times put out, black versus white has been here since the beginning of this country. And I see the Hispanic reaction to race and not wanting to declare either one as a very different perception. It seems to me that maybe the Latinx have, they're more fluid in their thinking about race. And I'm wondering if this will have an impact, if the Hispanic numbers are increasing, will we begin to be able to look at race more flexibly, more fluidly as they do, and will our perceptions begin to change? What do you think?
Well, don't they still have a problem with color of the skin, depending on whether or not, you know, the darker the skin, the less value? Like I know that happens in Brazil. So
In Brazil, yes.
yeah,
Yes.
whether or not that's going to really improve things or not, that time will tell, I guess. And you know, as there's more intermarriage and things like that, so that it's not quite so crystal clear. But
That's a good point, Anna. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience with it has been one that the Hispanics are more concerned with their ancestry, whether they can kind of count a line back to Spain, or whether they count themselves as indigenous people in the Americas that have been,
yes,
you know, that are called Hispanic now. And I think that is a real, I think you run into problems there that are kind of the equivalent of our racial problem. But we have limited experience, but there are still Mexicans who wear wristwatches that have the time set for Spain other than for Mexico, because they're so proud of their.
So Joel, when you're looking at the maps, and if anybody else wants to pop in, go ahead. But I do have this question. You know, one of the things that we have said to ourselves is, how can we get more involved and support, you know, or do more, or be more aware of, you know, all those different parts of creating a larger community that includes everyone. Do we really have much of a way of doing that in Venice itself? When I look at the numbers, I'm going, it's a lost cause. You know?
We're fighting a very high hill, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, all you need to do is go back probably 2 decades and see how much approval there has been in Venice for low-cost housing or low-income housing or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And you'll see there is a mindset that seems to me of keeping Venice where Venice is.
Yeah.
You know, that the general perception of race and race relations, I think, has changed so much in the last few years. And one of the things that Pastor said in his presentation was that we should always act as if the other is in the room. Remember when he said that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And he was doing it when playing basketball, and he, you know, kept people wondering whether he was straight or gay or whatever. But he said, just think in terms of, if you've got whites only, or the majority of whites, think of it as if the other is in the room. Okay, so we are prevented from actual facts to having a lot of blacks or other minority groups in the conversation. Could we move forward as a society by talking more amongst ourselves to become more aware of how we perceive things?
Yes, I think so. I'm 100% in favor of that. You know, just broadening our thought process, and I think that's a very good thing.
I know that some blacks don't really like to get into the conversation because we whites have a way of focusing on them and saying, okay, now you speak for your whole race, and people don't feel comfortable with that. So maybe this would be a way to move forward so that we are considering what we ourselves think and expanding from there. How could we do that?
You know, one thing that's happened recently is that the Florida Humanities Council has sponsored some events that they pulled together people of different races to have a continuing dialogue. In fact, I think one of them is tonight. And also the North Sarasota Library sponsored a series, and most of the people I did enter that one, were people from Newtown. It was very interesting, and but I didn't continue. I think it did continue, and I didn't continue. But it's certainly something that some of us could consider doing, is joining one of those groups.
One of the problems, I think, is that it came up, and I think in one of the VICA presentations last year, one of the speakers asked us in the audience, how many of you know someone of color that you might get together with occasionally for dinner or something? And I think that's a problem, because we don't have that many people here that we're going to be associating with. And when we still had a home up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, one of the friends that I had met was involved in arranging for sort of a festival on a weekend. And they wanted very much to get the people of color to come to it. And so I think they made a special effort to go to them and talk to them about what food would you like, what kind of music would you like, and to try to have something that was pleasant for everybody. And Dee and I went to it, and it was wonderful. There were a lot of people from different backgrounds there, and you didn't get to know anybody real well in that one situation, but it just made you think if there were some things you could do socially that maybe just get a chance to get to know each other better. It seemed to work real well up there. I don't know what happened after that, but.
Well, the racial disparities are quite a bit different in Maryland than they are in Venice, I'll say that. But other
very much, yeah.
I think I'm tired now. Are you?
Yeah.
Well, I do know, like, you know, the book club that
Yes.
I belong to is very, one of the things we've been working on is, a lot of racial related books, and beginning to understand how other people think, or, you know, their reactions to different things does open your eyes, and it does make you realize that we are really pretty daggone privileged, you know, and we look at a world through a different lens than, you know, people of other races and other cultures. So I think that's a big step in the right direction.
No.
I've been attending the meetings of Newtown Nation that Valerie Bouchard leads, and she's one of the active people in Newtown. She attends the city hall meetings. She attends the meetings of the school board, and really is trying to follow what's going on with local politics. And she's trying to help especially young Black men get training for jobs. And it's because it's so difficult, you know, for them to stay employed, and also when they're not employed, you know, they tend toward crime and violence. And she's really working on that, as are other people. It's a very, very complex situation, because she's trying to round people up and get them to be religious, to go to church and live a good life that way. It's so hard. I mean, I see the whole Black community is, with all that's going on, with all of the brutality and the murders of Black people, they have, the religion is the strongest thing that holds them together. And it's so sad. It's just overwhelmingly sad. And I find it's a little hard for me to take, because she is really, at this point, she is preaching and proselytizing and really, you know, reaching out for people. that way. And I'm not sure, she actually participated in the census. I worked with a man who was working for the census, and he had the hardest time getting people in Newtown to respond. And she was trying to get some of the students from New College to go out and hand literature out, go door to door. It was wonderful. She decided, it was too difficult to do it with a high school because that would take all kinds of concerns about responsibility, and it would be too long to get the approvals to do that. But she went out herself at one point, and it's very, very hard to mobilize the Black people to respond to the census. I mean, so many of them are afraid to take the COVID shots because of this horrible history of medical abuse of them. I fear that the results of the census will not show an accurate numbers for both Blacks and Hispanics. And of course, Hispanics have been, in this area, I think, have been, reluctant to speak up, to respond to the census because of fears of ICE being deported. So I just have no idea what it's going to look like when the census numbers come through.
Right. I'm worried about that too, especially the interference from the politicians last year that we had to deal with. But there are some bright spots. Let's end on a happy note or something. I sing with the Key Chorale, as most of you know, and our director and we sponsor for the Visible Man Academy. And it's a group of middle school Black boys that have been identified to come to a very, really militaristic like education system. I mean, they have a dress code, they have to, obey certain things, but we're providing a whole music curriculum for them. And those kids have so much potential. And I think we're going to be able to draw some of that out. Now, mind you, it's just, 40 boys but I think it's at a critical stage. And I think if we had more type of operations like that, it would be good. It doesn't have to be music related. It can be anything else, but I'm glad to see that. And Kendra, we found it interesting when planning to take the census of say like Cabrini Green in Chicago was, a high-rise, low-income, apartment-filled thing. You're right. If we send a census person in there to register and they went up to the 7th floor and knocked on the door, no one would answer.
Right.
We planned blitzkriegs, they were called, from the old German thing, where we would have a whole, say, 20 census workers invade the building at once, go to the same floor, knock on all the doors at once, and as soon as someone answered the door and saw that, it was
It's okay.
we got some answers. But it's strange tactics like that. You're right. They're very afraid of, of being, I don't know what, but of everything, I guess.
Well, just perhaps the word afraid is, maybe the more appropriate word is distrustful. And when we think about that word, there's good reason to feel that.
Yep. Kendra, you mentioned about the Black church, and I think the Black church has been a real solidifying element for the Black community. PBS this week has had, or beginning last week, had first in a 2-series session, and the second one was last night about the Black church in America. I don't know if anyone watched it. I think it's going to be repeated again on Saturday night. But the point is that at the end of that second presentation, they were talking about how disappointing it is that the Black youth are not believing in the church so much and not participating with things in the church. So this is going to mean changes for all of us ahead on that score too. So Well, folks, we've gone well over an hour. And are there more questions that you would really like to pose right now?
I have one, and this is concerning the census. Is there any, for any future censuses in 2030, or yeah, 2030, is there any possibility that they're looking at a different way of doing it? A data collection systems that may be different?
They always are
Okay.
looking. And this is a critical period in maybe the first 2 or 3 years of the new decade. They're so set up that, you know, certain things happen in each year of the decade to pull it off. And for example, you have to establish in the 7th year 535 offices, census offices around the country, one for each representative and one for each senator in their home district. And you have to outfit that with desks and computers and all that stuff. And people don't really recognize how that, you know, how important that is, but there's millions of dollars spent on this. That comes in year 7. And, you know, year 8, they have things to do. They do a preliminary dry run on 5 areas in the country in year 8 to see if there's something wrong with their methodology. So right now, they're almost, as soon as they close the books on 2020, and they're behind, they're going to be starting on just what you're saying, looking for ways to improve, I guess is the word.
When did the American Community Survey begin?
I think it first started probably in the early, maybe late 80s, early 90s, but it didn't publish anything until I think in the end of the 90s. And I think it's been more acceptable. Before, when you first started up, the Congress was saying, you don't need this extra money. It's a new program. Prove it to us that it's worth putting the money in, all like that. Once they got over that, I haven't heard any derogatory or things about it. But personally, I think I understand how it works. And that's where I go first for data that I want if we aren't in a decennial year.
So that's helping us stay more.
You'd be surprised. I urge you to go. I can't remember, I don't remember URLs, but try to play around with American Community Survey for Sarasota County. And you're going to know how many pipe fitters there are and how old they are and what diseases they had and all that stuff. You'd be surprised at the amount of data that is available.
So that's done by the U.S. Census Bureau also?
Yeah. American Community Survey, it's called.
Yeah, I got it. It's AmericanCensus.gov programs, surveys. It's there. It's if you put it in, it's right there. So.
Okay.
I have a question. I'd be interested in knowing what other people think about it. That we're in an older generation, and many of us have children and grandchildren now, and I get the sense that they have quite a different view about racial issues. And if you go to Venice High School and watch any sports events, it's heartwarming to see they don't seem to be hardly any discrimination there. You see people of color mixing with whites, and from what I can tell from our grandchildren, I think there's hope for the future. Maybe to add what you said, Joel.
Yeah.
Other people
if we could get rid of the old fogies like we are, cut off the top of the pyramids, I think there is hope. We, as you know, we have Black grandchildren and in high school, and very fearful for many things, especially when they started out. Things have been going well, and for which we're very happy and pleased, but it is a worry, and they have faced discrimination in the old sense of the term, but there is also a warm feeling I see between mixed groups of friends that are forming. And so, can we get more of it and less of the other? Can it happen fast enough? I guess I put it that way.
Well, I think I'd like to say Who was that who just said something?
I just said, thanks, Joel.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you, Joel, for all the work that you've gone through to bring this together for us. I hope that it's been a valuable experience for all of you, and we appreciate those of you who have joined us tonight. So thank you all. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.